Kael'Veth had served the Silurian Empire for 300 cycles, and in all that time he had never seen a species quite so fragile as the humans who stood before the Council of 12 that day. He watched them from his position near the great pillars of the chamber, his 4 eyes studying every detail of their soft bodies and their strange, expressive faces. They were small creatures, barely reaching the chest of an average Silurian warrior. Their skin looked thin enough to tear with a gentle touch, and their bones seemed like they would shatter from impacts that would only bruise a Silurian child. Commander Daniel Harris stood at the center of the delegation, his back straight and his eyes steady, despite the obvious physical disadvantages of his species. Beside him stood Lieutenant Samantha Reyes, a woman with dark hair and sharp features, who carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen battle many times before. "We have come to request an alliance," Harris said, his voice clear and strong in the vast chamber. "The Devourer fleet threatens all life in this sector of the galaxy, and we believe that together we can stop them." High Priestess Yulmara leaned forward on her throne, her ancient face showing something between amusement and pity. She had lived for over 1,000 cycles, and had watched countless species rise and fall like dust in the cosmic wind. What could these brief creatures possibly offer against an enemy that had consumed 17 civilizations? "You are aware," Yulmara said slowly, "that the Devourers have destroyed empires that spanned hundreds of worlds, empires with technology far beyond your own. Empires with warriors who could live for millennia?" Harris nodded without hesitation. "We are aware, High Priestess. And yet you wish to fight beside us? You whose lives are measured in mere decades? You whose bodies require constant temperature regulation and precise amounts of oxygen and water simply to survive?" "That is correct." Kael'Veth found himself leaning forward, curious about this strange species. He had studied their ship when it arrived at Station Meridian, a vessel they called the Valor's Edge. The technology was crude by Silurian standards, relying on primitive kinetic weapons and controlled fusion reactions. Their shields were laughably thin, and their hull armor would buckle under the kind of assault that Silurian ships could withstand for hours. After the audience ended, Yulmara summoned Kael'Veth to her private chambers. The ancient priestess stood by a window that looked out into the endless stars, her expression troubled. "What do you make of them?" she asked without turning around. Kael'Veth considered the question carefully before answering. "They are brave, High Priestess, perhaps foolishly so. But bravery without capability is merely a colorful form of suicide." "Yet there is something about them," Yulmara said quietly. "Something in their eyes that I have not seen in a very long time. Did you notice how the commander looked at me when I listed all the reasons his species should not fight? He did not flinch. No, he did not. And that troubles me, Kael'Veth. It troubles me greatly." She finally turned to face him. "I am assigning you as liaison to the human contingent. Watch them. Report to me anything unusual." Kael'Veth accepted the assignment without complaint, though he privately believed it would be a waste of his considerable talents. What could he possibly learn from creatures who would likely be dead within the first hour of combat? His first meeting with Commander Harris took place in a small conference room aboard the Valor's Edge. The human ship smelled strange to Kael'Veth, filled with unfamiliar scents of processed air and organic compounds. He noticed that the corridors were narrow and the ceilings low, designed for beings much smaller than himself. Harris greeted him with a gesture that Kael'Veth's translator identified as a handshake, a human custom of greeting. The commander's grip was firm but not strong, not by Silurian standards. Yet there was something in the way Harris held himself that suggested hidden depths. "I appreciate the Council granting our request," Harris said as they sat down at a table covered with tactical displays. "I know our fleet is not impressive by your standards." Your honesty is refreshing, Kael'Veth replied. Most species attempt to exaggerate their capabilities when seeking alliance. Harris smiled, a display that Kael'Veth was still learning to interpret. What would be the point? You can see our ships. You know what we can and cannot do. Lying about it would only get my people killed faster. Lieutenant Reyes entered the room, carrying data tablets and a container of some dark liquid that smelled bitter. She handed one tablet to Harris and offered Kael'Veth a polite nod before taking her seat. We have been studying the Devourer tactics, Reyes said, activating a holographic display. Their pattern is consistent across all 17 civilizations they have consumed. They overwhelm with numbers. They target leadership and infrastructure first, and they show no mercy to survivors. Kael'Veth had studied the same data for decades. You have described them accurately. What conclusion have you drawn? That fighting them the same way everyone else has fought them will produce the same results, Harris replied. Every species that faced the Devourers tried to match their numbers, tried to hold defensive lines, tried to protect their worlds one by one, and every species lost. What alternative do you propose? Harris and Reyes exchanged a look that Kael'Veth could not quite interpret. There was something passing between them, some shared understanding that transcended words. We do not intend to fight defensively, Harris said, and we do not intend to survive every engagement. Kael'Veth felt his 4 hearts skip their rhythm. You are planning suicide attacks, Reyes corrected. We are planning to make every human life cost the Devourers dearly. There is a difference. A suicide attack wastes life for minimal gain. What we are planning is strategic sacrifice, where every death serves a larger purpose. The concept was foreign to Kael'Veth. Silurians valued their long lives above almost everything else. The idea of deliberately planning for death, of building a strategy around the willingness to die, seemed almost obscene. My people have a saying, Harris said, seeming to sense Kael'Veth's discomfort. It is not the size of the dog in the fight that matters. It is the size of the fight in the dog. I do not understand this reference. Harris leaned forward, and Kael'Veth saw something in the human's eyes that he had not noticed before. It was not madness, though it resembled madness. It was not courage, though it included courage. It was something else entirely, something that made Kael'Veth's ancient instincts whisper warnings. It means that raw power is not everything, Harris explained. A smaller, weaker creature can defeat a larger, stronger one if it wants victory badly enough. If it is willing to sacrifice everything, to endure anything, to keep fighting long after any rational being would have surrendered. And you believe humans possess this quality? Harris smiled again, and this time Kael'Veth recognized the expression. It was the smile of someone who knew something that others did not, someone who held a secret that would only be revealed in time. We have spent our entire existence fighting things bigger and stronger than ourselves, Harris said. The universe has been trying to kill us since the moment we climbed down from the trees. Ice ages, predators, plagues, each other, and we are still here. We are still fighting. We will always be fighting, until the last human draws the last breath. Kael'Veth left the meeting with a strange feeling in his chest, something he had not experienced in centuries. It took him several hours to identify the emotion. It was the first faint stirring of fear. The Devourer fleet arrived 3 cycles ahead of all predictions, and Kael'Veth felt his blood turn cold as he watched 17,000 vessels emerge from fold space like a spreading infection across the stars. He stood on the bridge of the Silurian flagship Eternal Grace, surrounded by the finest warriors of his species, and he knew with absolute certainty that they were all going to die. The mathematics were simple and brutal. The Allied armada numbered barely 4,000 ships, a collection of Silurians, Vethkai, Moruni, and the small human contingent. Against 17,000 Devourer vessels, they had no chance. Admiral Vorteth stood at the command platform, his scarred face showing no emotion as he studied the tactical displays. He had fought the Devourers before, decades ago, and he was one of the few survivors of that encounter. He knew better than anyone what they faced. All ships, prepare for defensive formation. We will make them pay for every light second of space they take. Then the communication channel crackled with a human voice, and everything changed. Admiral, this is Commander Harris of the Valor's Edge. We are requesting permission to deploy our ships in a forward position. Vorteth turned toward the communication console with disbelief written across his features. Forward position? Commander, that would place you directly in the path of the Devourer Vanguard. That is correct, Admiral. You would be annihilated before our main fleet could engage. Your entire contingent would be destroyed in minutes. There was a pause on the channel, and when Harris spoke again, his voice was calm in a way that seemed almost unnatural. Admiral, with respect, we are not asking to survive the opening engagement. We are asking to shape it. Kael'veth moved closer to the tactical display, watching as the human fleet began to break from the main formation. 47 ships, tiny and fragile compared to the Silurian warships, moving towards certain death. They have gone insane, one of the Silurian officers muttered. The stress of facing the Devourers has broken their minds. But Kael'veth was not so sure. He remembered his conversation with Harris, remembered the strange light in the human's eyes, remembered the talk of fighting and sacrifice and the size of the fight in the dog. Something was happening here that he did not fully understand. He opened a private channel to the Valor's Edge. Commander Harris, what are you doing? This is suicide. Kael'veth, my friend, Harris replied, and there was warmth in his voice despite everything. I want you to watch carefully. I want you to remember what you see today. Because today you are going to learn something about humans that your history books have never recorded. The human fleet formed into a strange pattern that Kael'veth did not recognize. It was not a defensive formation, nor was it a standard attack configuration. The ships were spread in a seemingly random arrangement, with large gaps between them. The Devourer Vanguard, 2,000 ships strong, descended upon the human formation like a wave of death. Their weapons opened fire, filling space with plasma and kinetic rounds and terrible energies that could tear through hull plating like paper. Kael'veth expected to see the human ships scatter, to watch them be picked off one by one as they tried desperately to escape. What he saw instead made him forget to breathe. The humans did not retreat. They did not scatter. They flew directly into the heart of the enemy formation, weaving through the storm of weapons fire with impossible skill. And then, one by one, they began to detonate their own reactors. But not randomly, not in panic. Each explosion was precise, calculated, positioned to cause maximum damage to the surrounding Devourer vessels. The human pilots were choosing their moments of death with the same careful attention that one might give to choosing a meal. Lieutenant Kevin Torres flew his ship into the center of a Devourer cluster and triggered his reactor at the exact moment when the enemy vessels were closest together. The explosion destroyed his ship instantly, but it also destroyed 12 Devourer vessels and damaged 30 more. Pilot Maria Vasquez dove her ship into the engine section of a Devourer command vessel, sacrificing herself to cripple a ship that would have killed hundreds of Allied soldiers. Captain Darnell Washington rammed his burning, damaged ship into a Devourer carrier's weapons array, preventing it from firing on the main Allied fleet. Kael'veth watched in stunned silence as 47 human ships destroyed over 800 Devourer vessels in 18 minutes. 18 minutes of controlled chaos, of deliberate sacrifice, of death embraced rather than fled. And then came the part that truly shattered his understanding of reality. The surviving humans, the ones who had ejected in escape pods into the chaos of battle, were broadcasting their positions, but they were not calling for rescue. They were requesting pickup so they could board other ships and keep fighting. Kael'Veth tracked one escape pod on the tactical display. It belonged to a human pilot named Kevin Torres, the same man who had destroyed 12 Devourer ships with his sacrifice. But Torres had not died. He had ejected at the last possible moment, his pod thrown clear by the explosion. Now Torres was floating toward a damaged Devourer scout ship, and Kael'Veth watched in disbelief as the human used a hull repair torch to weld himself to the enemy vessel. Torres began cutting through the alien armor with nothing but a plasma torch and a sidearm, determined to board the enemy ship alone. "What is he doing?" Vorteth demanded. "That is insane. One human cannot take a Devourer ship alone." But Kael'Veth was beginning to understand. "He is not trying to take the ship, Admiral. He is trying to disable it, to cause damage, to make his survival mean something." Across the battlefield, similar scenes were unfolding. Human survivors were refusing to wait for rescue. They were attacking damaged enemy vessels, sabotaging systems, fighting with whatever weapons they could find. One human, a woman named Patricia Ruiz, boarded a Devourer ship through a hull breach and fought her way through the interior with nothing but a combat knife and raw determination. "They are insane," Vorteth repeated, but his voice had changed. There was something new in it, something that sounded almost like awe. "No," Kael'Veth said slowly, watching the tactical display as the human survivors continued to fight and die and cause damage far beyond what should have been possible. "They are something much worse than insane. They are something the universe has never seen before." The Devourer vanguard was in chaos. The coordinated human attacks had disrupted their formation, destroyed their command structure, and created confusion among ships that were used to facing enemies who ran and hid. The Devourers did not know how to respond to an enemy that embraced death, that used sacrifice as a weapon, that kept fighting even after being destroyed. Commander Harris had somehow survived the initial attack, his ship damaged but still functional. He was directing the remaining human pilots, coordinating their suicide runs and rescue operations, keeping the chaos organized. "Commander Harris," Kael'Veth said over the communication channel, "I do not understand. Why would you do this? Why would you sacrifice so many of your people?" Harris's response came through clearly despite the interference of battle. "Because someone has to go first, Kael'Veth. Someone has to show the Devourers that they can bleed. Someone has to prove that they are not invincible. And my people have never been very good at waiting for someone else to do the hard things." Kael'Veth closed his eyes for a moment, processing everything he had witnessed. When he opened them again, he saw that the main Allied fleet was advancing, taking advantage of the chaos the humans had created. The battle was not won, not even close, but for the first time in centuries, the Devourers were on the defensive. For the first time in centuries, someone had shown them what it felt like to be afraid. And it had taken 47 tiny ships, crewed by fragile beings with brief lives, to do what empires spanning hundreds of worlds had failed to accomplish. Kael'Veth began to understand why the ancient texts spoke of humans with such caution, why the elder races whispered their name with something that sounded almost like fear. It was not their strength. They had none. It was not their technology. It was primitive. Something that defied all logic and reason. Humans simply refused to accept defeat, even when defeat was the only rational outcome. The battle for Station Meridian lasted 9 days. And during those 9 days, Kael'Veth witnessed things that would forever change his understanding of the universe. He fought beside humans on 3 different fronts, watched them bleed and suffer and die, and slowly came to realize that everything he had ever believed about strength and weakness was wrong. These fragile creatures, with their soft skin and their brief lives, possessed something that no other species in the galaxy seemed to have, something that made them terrifying in ways that had nothing to do with physical power. On the 3rd day, Kael'Veth found himself defending a critical corridor alongside a human squad led by Sergeant Amanda Cortez. The Devourers had breached the station's outer hull and were pouring through the gaps, their monstrous forms filling the narrow passageways with death. Cortez was a small woman with short brown hair and eyes that seemed to burn with an inner fire. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had fought many battles, directing her squad with sharp commands while firing her rifle at the advancing enemy. Then a plasma bolt struck her left arm. Kael'Veth saw the impact, saw the flesh and bone blacken and burn, saw the arm become useless in an instant. A Silurian warrior would have entered healing stasis immediately, allowing their body to recover. A Moruni would have retreated to seek medical attention. Any rational being would have recognized that they could no longer fight effectively. Cortez did none of these things. She looked at her destroyed arm for exactly 1 second, then used her remaining hand to pull her belt free. She wrapped the belt around her upper arm, pulled it tight to stop the bleeding, and picked up her rifle with her one good hand. "Sergeant, you need medical attention," Kael'Veth shouted over the sounds of battle. Cortez laughed, a rough and painful sound that somehow still contained humor. "Medical can wait. These things cannot." She continued fighting, moving slower than before, but never stopping. She killed 18 more Devourers with her remaining arm, before blood loss finally dropped her to the ground. And even then, even lying in a pool of her own blood, she did not stop. "Kael'Veth," she called out, her voice weak but clear. "There are 4 hostiles coming through the ventilation shaft to your left. 30 seconds. He spun and saw nothing, but he trusted her words. When the Devourers burst through the shaft, exactly where she had predicted, he was ready. Her warning saved his life. Cortez was still giving targeting information to her squad when she finally lost consciousness, her voice fading mid-sentence as her body gave out. On the 5th day, Kael'Veth discovered what humans called sleep deprivation. The station's power systems were failing under constant assault, and the engineering team had been working without rest for over 100 hours to keep the shields running. He found Chief Engineer Ryan Okonkwo in the main reactor room, surrounded by sparking cables and failing systems. Okonkwo was a tall man with dark skin and intelligent eyes, but those eyes were now bloodshot and unfocused. His hands were shaking so badly that he could barely hold his tools. "You need to rest," Kael'Veth told him. "Your body is shutting down. I can see the symptoms of cognitive impairment." Okonkwo smiled, a strange expression on his exhausted face. "Rest is for people who have the luxury of time. Right now, if I stop working, the shields fail. If the shields fail, everyone on this station dies." He turned back to his work. "I will rest when I am dead or when this battle is over, whichever comes first." "How can you function like this? Your brain must be barely working." "Spite," Okonkwo replied without looking up. "Lots and lots of spite. The Devourers want me to fail. They want me to give up, so I will not give them the satisfaction." He laughed, a hollow sound. "Humans are very good at spite, Kael'Veth. We can do amazing things when we are angry enough." He kept working, his trembling hands somehow finding the right connections despite his impaired state. The shields held. On the 7th day, the Devourers breached the command center. Kael'Veth fought beside Lieutenant Reyes and a squad of human marines in a corridor that became so filled with bodies that they were standing on the dead to continue fighting. A Devourer blade found the gap between Kael'Veth's armor plates and sliced into his side. The pain was immense, like fire spreading through his body. He fell to the ground, his strength leaving him. "This is how I die," he thought. "After 300 cycles of service, I will fall here, in a corridor filled with corpses, surrounded by beings I barely understand." Then Reyes was there, standing over him. She had taken wounds that should have killed her, A deep slash across her face had destroyed one of her eyes, leaving a bloody ruin. A stab wound in her thigh was bleeding heavily, soaking her uniform with red. But she was still standing, still fighting, her rifle firing until it overheated and then swinging it like a club. "Stay with me," she growled at Kael'veth, grabbing his armor with one hand while fighting off devourers with the other. "You do not get to die. I did not drag your heavy body through 3 decks just to lose you now." "Why?" he gasped, the pain making it hard to think. "I am not your people. I am not your obligation." Reyes looked down at him with her one remaining eye, and there was no fear in her expression. There was only determination, a burning will that seemed to transcend her physical form. "You are fighting beside me," she said. "That makes you my people." She dragged him to cover, her wounded leg leaving a trail of blood behind them. She propped him against a wall, and stood guard over him, fighting off wave after wave of devourers, while calling for medical support. A human medic arrived, a young woman named Nicole Brennan, with steady hands and calm eyes. She worked on Kael'veth's wounds with focused efficiency, sealing the damaged tissue and stopping the blood loss. "Why are you saving me?" Kael'veth asked her. "I am a Silurian. I am not one of your kind." Nicole smiled, her hands never stopping their work. "You are fighting the same enemy we are. You are bleeding on the same deck we are. That is enough." She finished sealing his wound and met his eyes. "My grandmother used to say that humans are just stubborn animals who learned how to use fire and decided that nothing in the universe was ever going to push us around again. We have been refusing to accept our place in the natural order for thousands of years. Why would we stop now?" Kael'veth lay there, wounded and bleeding, while humans fought and died around him. He watched them take injuries that would have killed most species, watched them keep fighting through pain and exhaustion and fear, watched them protect each other with a fierceness that seemed almost primal, and he began to understand. The ancient texts spoke of many powerful species, races that had conquered galaxies and bent reality to their will. Some had achieved what scholars called godhood, transcending their physical forms to become beings of pure energy and thought. But none of them had possessed what these fragile humans had. None of them had shown this willingness to suffer, to sacrifice, to keep fighting when all hope was gone. The gods feared humans not because humans were strong. They feared humans because humans did not know when to stop. They feared humans because when you knocked a human down, they got back up. When you hurt them, they got angry. When you killed one of their companions, the others fought harder instead of running. The gods feared humans because humans treated death not as an ending, but as a price they were willing to pay. And that, Kael'veth realized as the battle raged around him, was more terrifying than any weapon or any power the universe had ever produced. The turning point came on the 8th day, in a moment so small that Kael'veth almost missed its importance. The Devourers had cut off the station's main power supply, and the shields were failing. The Allied armada was breaking apart under the relentless assault, ships exploding like stars going dark. Admiral Vorteth had given the order to retreat, pulling the surviving vessels back to regroup for another stand. And Commander Harris had refused. Kael'veth listened to the communication channel from his position on the station, where Nicole was still tending to his wounds with her shaking but steady hands. The exchange between Vorteth and Harris crackled through the speakers, and every word seemed to carry the weight of destiny. "We are not leaving," Harris said, his voice calm despite the explosions and alarms in the background. "There are still people on that station, my people, your people, people who trusted us to protect them." "The mathematics are clear," Vorteth replied, his voice tight with frustration. "Remaining here is tactically indefensible. We must preserve our forces for the next engagement." "For what?" Harris interrupted. "For the next stand? And the one after that?" How many retreats do we make until there is nowhere left to retreat to? There was silence on the channel, broken only by the sounds of distant battle. The devourers consume, Harris continued. That is all they do. They do not negotiate. They do not compromise. They do not stop. They just consume. And we have been fighting them the same way for centuries, falling back and regrouping and sacrificing world after world. But we do not have to keep doing this. What do you suggest? Vorteth asked, and Kael'Veth heard something new in the Admiral's voice. It was not contempt anymore. It was genuine curiosity, perhaps even hope. I suggest we stop running. I suggest that today, right here, we draw a line in the sand. Not because we know we can win, but because if we keep retreating, we definitely lose. Every species that stood against the devourers did so alone, and they fell alone. But we are not alone anymore. We have each other. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then, one by one, the Allied ships began to respond. Silurian vessels broke from the retreat formation and turned back toward the battle. Maruni warships reversed their course. Vethkai scouts rejoined the defensive line. You humans, Vorteth said finally, and his voice had changed completely. There was respect in it now, and perhaps even admiration. You are either the bravest or the most foolish species in the galaxy. Both, Harris replied, usually at the same time. That is kind of our thing. That night, if night had any meaning in the darkness of space, Kael'Veth found himself sitting with the human soldiers in a damaged cargo bay. The battle was still ongoing, but there was a brief pause as both sides regrouped. The humans had taken shelter here to rest, though most of them were too wounded or too tired to truly sleep. They were exhausted beyond anything Kael'Veth had ever witnessed. Their bodies were failing, their wounds were bleeding through bandages, and many of them were clearly dying. But they were still alive, and they were singing. The sound surprised Kael'Veth more than anything else he had experienced during the battle. These people were facing death, surrounded by enemies, trapped on a station that was slowly falling apart around them. And they were singing. Not songs of victory or glory, simple songs. Songs about home and family and the people they loved. Songs about places they might never see again and moments they would never forget. The melodies carried an aching, terrible beauty that made Kael'Veth's chest hurt in ways he could not explain. Corporal Derek Ruiz sat nearby, his legs shattered and held together with emergency splints. He was teaching Kael'Veth the words to something called Amazing Grace, an old human song about redemption and hope. How can you sing? Kael'Veth asked when the song ended. How can you find beauty in this moment? We are surrounded by death. The station is dying. We may not survive the night. Ruiz smiled, his face pale from blood loss, but his eyes bright with something that Kael'Veth could only describe as joy. Because that is what we do. We find beauty everywhere we can, in sunsets and music and the faces of people we love. We find it because we need it. Life is short for us, friend. It is hard and painful and sometimes really cruel. If we did not find beauty in it, we would go insane. He paused, adjusting his broken leg with a grimace of pain. Or maybe we are already insane. Maybe that is our secret. We are all a little crazy, and the universe has never figured out how to deal with that. Nicole finished checking Kael'Veth's wounds and sat down beside him, her hands still trembling from exhaustion, but her spirit unbroken. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes for a moment. You know what my grandmother used to say about us? She asked quietly. She said that humans are just really stubborn monkeys who discovered fire and then decided that nothing in the entire universe was going to push us around ever again. She laughed softly. Every time something tries to kill us, we just get angrier and more creative. Ice ages, diseases, wars, Famine. The universe keeps trying to teach us our place, and we keep refusing to learn the lesson. Reyes joined them, her wounds bandaged and her remaining eyes sharp, despite her exhaustion. She had a container of something that smelled bitter, a human drink called coffee, that they seemed to rely on for energy. "You want to know the real truth about humans?" Reyes said, sitting down heavily. "We are afraid all the time, every single one of us. We know how fragile we are. We know that any moment could be our last, but we fight anyway, because the alternative is worse. Letting the darkness win, letting the monsters take everything, giving up on the people who count on us." She shook her head. "That is worse than dying. That is worse than anything." Kael'thas looked at these impossible beings, these fragile creatures who had no right to be alive, let alone fighting. Their bodies were broken, and their spirits should have been crushed. By every rational measure, they should have surrendered days ago. Instead, they sat together in a damaged cargo bay, sharing songs and stories and bitter drinks. They laughed at jokes that Kael'thas did not understand. They cried for fallen friends without shame. They held each other's hands and promised to keep fighting until the very end. "I think I am beginning to understand," Kael'thas said slowly. "You do not fight because you believe you will win. You fight because fighting is who you are. It is what you do. It is what makes you human." Ruiz nodded, his smile warm, despite everything. "Now you are getting it, friend. We do not need hope to keep going. We do not need the odds to be in our favor. We just need a reason to stand up one more time." He gestured at the people around them. "And look at all the reasons sitting right here." Kael'thas felt something shift inside him, something fundamental changing in the way he saw the universe. For 300 cycles, he had believed that power was the measure of worth, that strength determined who survived and who fell. But these humans had shown him a different truth. Sometimes the greatest power was simply refusing to quit. Sometimes the most terrifying weapon was a being who kept fighting long after any reasonable creature would have stopped. And sometimes, the thing that gods feared most was not strength or intelligence or technology. It was the unbreakable will of creatures who had nothing left to lose and everything still to prove. The final battle began at dawn, according to station time, an arbitrary measurement that the humans insisted on keeping, because, as Reyes explained, they needed something normal to hold on to, even if it was just numbers on a clock. The Devourer command ship had arrived. It was a vessel so massive that it generated its own gravitational field, pulling debris and smaller ships toward it like a hungry mouth. The ancient texts called it a world eater, and the name was not an exaggeration. This single ship had destroyed civilizations older than the Silurian Empire. It had consumed species that had achieved what some called godhood. Kael'thas watched from the station's observation deck as the World Eater took position at the center of the Devourer fleet. Its weapons were already charging, dark energies building in arrays that could crack planets. Against such power, the Allied fleet looked like insects before a storm. Then Commander Harris made his final move. "All ships, this is Harris." His voice came through the command channel. "I am taking the Valor's Edge on a direct approach to the World Eater. There is a vulnerability in its lower section, a thermal exhaust port connected to the main reactor. If we can hit it, we can start a chain reaction that will tear the ship apart." Admiral Vortev responded immediately. "Commander, that port is only a few meters wide. The approach is defended by thousands of weapons platforms. No targeting system in the galaxy could make that shot." Who said anything about a targeting system? Kael'thas understood then what Harris intended. The human was going to fly the approach manually, using nothing but his own reflexes and skill. It was suicide. The defensive fire alone would destroy any ship long before it reached the target. "Daniel, no!" Reyes shouted into the communication channel. She was standing beside Kael'thas, her wounded face tight with emotion. There has to be another way. There is not, Harris replied, and his voice was gentle. Someone has to go, Sam, and I have always been better at flying than you. This is not a joke. No, it is not, but it is necessary. The World Eater will destroy the station within the hour. It will destroy the fleet. It will consume everything we have fought for, unless someone stops it. There was a pause. I am not asking for permission, Sam. I am saying goodbye. The Valor's Edge broke from the fleet formation and accelerated toward the World Eater. Calveth watched on the tactical display as the tiny human ship dove into a storm of weapons fire that should have been impossible to survive. But Harris was not relying on luck or armor. He was flying with a skill that Calveth had never witnessed, weaving through the defensive fire like water flowing around stones. Every movement was precise, calculated, perfect. The ship rolled and twisted and dove through gaps that seemed too small to exist. How is he doing that? Vortef demanded, watching the same display. The reaction time required would be impossible for most pilots. Reyes was crying, tears streaming down her wounded face, but her voice was steady. Daniel has been flying since he was 16 years old. He spent 20 years mastering combat maneuvers. He told me once that flying was the only time he felt truly free. She watched the display as Harris penetrated deeper into the defensive perimeter. He is not the best pilot because of his reflexes. He is the best because he loves it. He loves every second of being in that cockpit. The World Eater seemed to recognize the threat. Its weapons focused on the tiny ship, pouring fire at Harris from every direction. The Valor's Edge took hits, its shields failing, its hull breaching, but it kept flying, it kept moving, it kept getting closer. Commander Harris, Calveth said into the communication channel, I want you to know that you have changed my understanding of the universe. You and your people have shown me what true strength really means. Harris laughed, and even now, flying towards certain death, there was joy in the sound. Just tell everyone what you saw, Calveth. Tell them about the crazy humans who refused to give up. Tell them that we were here, that we mattered, that we fought. I will, I promise. The Valor's Edge was falling apart now, systems failing, fires burning, but Harris kept it flying through sheer willpower. He dodged the last defensive platform, rolled past the final barrier, and lined up his approach on the exhaust port. Sam, Harris said, his voice soft, tell my family I love them. Tell them I went out swinging. I will, Daniel. I will. The Valor's Edge fired its remaining weapons and then dove directly into the exhaust port. The ship vanished into the heart of the World Eater. And for a moment, nothing happened. Then the explosions began. They started small, flashes of light deep within the massive vessel. Then they grew larger, spreading through the superstructure, like fire through dry wood. Secondary systems detonated. Power cores ruptured. The World Eater began to tear itself apart from the inside. When the main reactor finally exploded, the blast was visible across the entire sector. The World Eater died in a blinding flash that took 40,000 Devourer ships with it. The cascade reaction rippled through the enemy fleet, destroying vessels that had survived every previous engagement. Commander Daniel Harris did not survive. But in his death, he killed more enemies than any warrior in the recorded history of the galaxy. He saved more lives than could ever be counted. He changed the course of a war that had seemed impossible to win. And he did it not through superior technology or overwhelming force. He did it through the same thing that had carried humans through every challenge they had ever faced. Stubborn, beautiful, terrifying human will. The battle ended hours later, the remaining Devourer ships retreating into fold space. The Allied fleet had won, though the cost had been enormous. Thousands of ships destroyed, millions of lives lost, wounds that would take generations to heal. But they had won. Calveth returned to the Silurian homeworld months later, after the treaties were signed and the recovery began. The Devourers were not destroyed, not completely, but they were broken. They would return someday, as they always did. But for now, the galaxy had peace. He became High Priest of the Temple of the Eternal, and in that role he did something that no Silurian had ever done before. He rewrote the sacred texts. He added a new chapter about a species so young that they had barely begun to explore the stars. A species so fragile that their children could be killed by falling from their own height. A species so short-lived that their greatest heroes died before a Silurian finished growing. He wrote about humans. He wrote about Daniel Harris, who flew into certain death with a smile on his face. He wrote about Samantha Reyes, who stood over a fallen alien and called him her people. He wrote about Amanda Cortez, who fought with one arm and refused to stop. He wrote about Ryan Okonkwo, who kept shields running through spite and stubbornness. He wrote about Nicole Brennan, whose hands shook, but whose heart never wavered. He wrote the truth that he had learned in a cargo bay, surrounded by singing soldiers, on a station that was dying around them. The gods do not fear humans, because humans are strong. They are not. The gods do not fear humans, because humans are wise. They are often foolish. The gods do not fear humans, because humans live forever. They die so easily, so quickly, in so many ways. The gods fear humans, because humans do not fear the gods. Because when you tell a human that something is impossible, they smile and try anyway. Because when you knock them down, they get back up. Because when you kill their friends, they fight harder, instead of running. The gods fear humans, because humans have looked at the universe in all its vast, cold, terrible beauty, and decided that it matters anyway. That life matters, that love matters, that standing up for what is right matters, even when you cannot win. That is why the gods fear them. That is why everyone should fear them. And that is why, when the darkness comes again, we should all be grateful that humans stand with us. Because humans have something to prove, and they will burn down the universe itself to prove it.